People who knew someone who died in a freak accident. What happened? A cousin of mine was electrocuted by a drive pepper machine. His 2 children received $60. That their mom lost on bingo. A mom went ice skating. Little slip. Fell. All everyone saw was her bump her head lightly. Family finished skating. On the ride home, she started speaking gibberish. Dad dropped kids at the grandparents. Took mom to the Brain swelling. Coma. Dead a week later. My insurance guy was pulling a limb out of a large tree with a chain and a rope. He was behind the pickup. His wife was driving the truck. Rope snapped from the strain and chain snapped back and hit him in the head, killing him instantly. He was in his 50s. Nice guy, too. Ironic thing is this is exactly the sort of scenario he would describe as to why you need life insurance. There was a person at the beach who got impaled by a flying beach umbrella. Horrible situation. Her husband was right beside her and she died within seconds. A friend of a friend showed up at his girlfriend's apartment with a head wound. He didn't know how it happened. He also didn't know how he drove over there. She took him to the where he ended up passing away. He had his keys, wallet and phone on him. The only thing we could think of is he might have tripped, fell and hit his head in the wrong spot. When I was a 13-year-old boy, I witnessed my grandfather die. He was less than 15 feet away from me when he was decapitated by shrapnel from a broken piece of heavy farm equipment. I'm 50 years old and still struggle with that moment in time. PTSD can be a real bitch. A friend slipped and fell in the tub. Cracked his head. His roommate found him a half-hour later. Died on the way to the hospital. I knew this kid in HS who always ran from class to class pulling his roller backpack behind him. So it's no surprise when he visited the Grand Canyon with family that he wanted to run down a slope. Well, he got going too fast and couldn't stop himself. His entire family watched him run off the side of the Grand Canyon. Oof. Edit. Now that I think about it, some of the people I went to high school with were wild. There was a serial killer who began stabbing homeless people in order to scare his dad into coming home, and also a teacher who scissored another girl during lunchtime. Edit. The sex kind of scissoring. Teacher sauce. Serial killer classmate. My SIL's aunt died of hypothermia. She went for a walk out in the hills in the winter. She knew the trail very well but got disoriented by a light snowfall and got lost. She got cold and tired. Laid down by a rock and died of hypothermia. She was 100 yards from her car. I was snowboarding in 1997 in Switzerland with a good friend. He was skiing. I had caught an edge and landed on the back of my head while also twisting my knee badly. I was being looked over by the mountain rescue and first aid. I told my friend he could keep skiing. I would head back to our villa. I ended up going to sleep at around 6 p.m. as I had a hot shower and some Tylenol 3s after dinner. I woke up to see my friend hadn't returned and thought it was odd, but maybe he hooked up with a lady at some bar. Friend never came back from skiing. He was found deep in a crevasse the next afternoon and frozen to death. Swimming, and one of my buddies was screwing with the grate thing over a drain at the bottom. Got his foot stuck and couldn't extricate himself. His brother, cousin, and I nearly drowned trying to free him, so we got to watch him die. Haven't thought about this one in a bit. My neighbor was cleaning his gutters and fell off his roof because he missed his footing when stepping. Fell right on his head. This was a few years back now, but the family moved quickly after, even though it had been their house for like 30 years. I can't say I blame them. A guy the first went to high school with was helping his family do some repairs to a silo on their family farm. A section of the silo's roofing gave way and in he went. Suffocated under thousands of pounds of grain. My uncle was mowing grass on an embankment next to a small body of water. The mower unexpectedly slipped down the embankment and overturned on top of him, pinning him under the water. He drowned in a few feet of water that he otherwise could have stood up in. Edit. Lots of folks asking where, when. Not recent. About 13 years ago in the American Southeast. Based on responses. Though. Maybe not as much a freak accident as I thought. Seems to happen a lot. A friend of mine was riding his four-wheeler out at an off-road park. He kicked up a tree branch that impaled him in the thigh. He bled to death before anyone even knew it happened. Someone I went to school with was killed when someone went over a bridge over the highway onto the car she was in. She was killed, it seems, on impact. As far as I'm aware, the person who jumped survived. I'm gonna add an edit here to say it was my understanding that the boy jumped. Initial reports said it was a suicide attempt. But that isn't really able to be confirmed, as the person in question is still a minor. So I'm gonna change the wording. I didn't really anticipate this would get a lot of attention. I can't comment on his intentions. Also, the other person in the car did survive. The girl I went to school with was the only casualty in the incident. No charges or lawsuits happened after the fact. Just one of those things. Teacher in my school lost all 3 kids in a freak traffic accident on the highway. Their car lost a tire, which caused them to swerve into the gas tank of a semi-truck, which exploded, killing 2 of them instantly. The 3rd kid managed to crawl out of the car while he was on fire, and died later in the hospital. The saddest part is that they were all on their way to visit their father in the hospital after his back surgery. A guy the first went to HS with got hit by a train. It wasn't suicide. It was before Uber and he had been at a party drinking. He did the responsible thing by taking the subway. When he heard the train coming he stood up to take a step forward, like everyone does, but was so drunk that he stumbled over his own feet and fell onto the track. Lovely girl I went to HS with got a scholarship to a prestigious university. Being one of the very few students from my shitty school to make it to college or uni. 2 weeks into term her roommate found her laying in her bed dead. The heating boiler was faulty and she died of carbon monoxide poisoning in her sleep. We'd even thrown a party for her to celebrate her achievement. This was in 1996 and I'm tearing up a bit thinking about this. RIP Sonia. My childhood friend, later, as an adult, fell to his death in Acadia National Park when he fell off a cliff attempting to get a nice picture. If you live in corn-heavy Midwest areas of America, you're probably familiar with detasseling. Detasseling is a job a lot of smaller towns will let kids do, I think from 13 up. With parental permission. It's very common where I'm from. Essentially, you just walk with a group of other people through cornfields pulling the tassel off the top to prevent them from germinating and seeding excessively. Anyway, like 2 years after I did it, there was an accident involving 2 high school freshmen stepping into a puddle that an electric irrigator was shorting into. One of them basically died immediately. The other en route. RIP Hannah and Jade. Had a classmate who was working outside. Got stung by a wasp and had an allergic reaction and died less than 24 hours later. He was married 7 months. They were working on starting a family. His wife had to make the final decision as he was completely brain dead. Guy was working on his car. The brake failed, and his head was crushed by the wheel. The tire was off at the time. I have a few colleagues. Just in the last 8 months alone. One was killed when a drunk semi-truck driver drove through the gas pump he was fueling up at. Left 5 kids behind. Another was an accomplished and experienced athlete. Killed when his snowmobile flipped on him. Left 3 kids. The third was practicing on a closed road, professional driver. Closed course situation. The car left the road by a few feet and he was impaled on a fence post. It's been a shit year. Guy the first knew was driving a tractor trailer with a stack of pipe on the back. He swerved to avoid an accident after a car cut him off. Went into the ditch, and was cut in half when the load was propelled forward by the inertia from the sudden stop. Was putting up decorations in the barn. Getting ready for a wedding. Apparently something up there was in the way and he decided it needed to be cut off, so he took a chainsaw up the ladder to do it. Lost his balance and fell off the ladder while holding the chainsaw. I don't know if it's a freak accident. Or an expected one. A guy the first knew in HS was in the hatchback area of a small car. With 4 other guys who were in the seats. They had a crash with another car. Everyone in both cars was killed. And everyone in both cars was drunk. The guy the first know, in the hatchback, was cut in half. Got a tongue piercing. That same night. Took a sleeping pill to sleep. Choked on his tongue which was swollen from the piercing. Childhood friend of mine drowned. His leg got trapped swimming in a relatively shallow river. He went down and just never came back up. It happened to one of the nicest people I ever knew, and it makes me so mad that we lost touch before I found out what happened. Not much of an accident I suppose, but my little brother suffered from type 1 diabetes, gotta take insulin shots frequently every day. He'd had it for 15 years but still barely made an effort to handle it because he never got comfortable with having to stab himself daily. One evening he went to bed with a low blood sugar. Something he'd admitted to doing many times before that. We'd scold him for constantly and warned him would kill him, and just didn't wake up the next day. I saw him on the 5th. Found out he was gone by the 8th. If it had been my mother or father it would have made sense. But to lose my baby brother so suddenly just feels so wrong. Edit. Thank you all so much for your support, it means a ton. Keep your loved ones close. And if they have medical conditions, make sure that they have safety nets and contingencies in place too. All it takes is one night with low or even high blood sugar and it could be over. A guy the first knew was setting up a rope swing over a lake for his kids and their friends, which he had done many times before. He always would take a practice swing himself before he would let the kids go. His hand slipped off the rope and he fell before he was over the lake. He hit his head on a rock and died in front of the kids. I regret opening this thread. Freak accidents are terrifying. Knew a guy who was in a car crash and saw his aunt almost beheaded. He was about 10. Screwed up his mind. At about 20 he flipped his dirt bike with his girlfriend on the back and it cracked her head open. Was deep in the woods camping. She died. Couple years later he was stealing a motorcycle, walking it across the street at night in the rain and got hit by a car. Lost a leg. Couple years after that he was angry at a music venue, so he and a friend tried to build a bomb in a parking lot. It went off and they both were killed. Girl I grew up with was driving home in college and go into a horrible car accident. That gave her brain damage and pretty much removed her jaw from her skull. Tons of surgery, and 3 years later she walked down the aisle at her wedding. She was in her yard a few months after her wedding and slipped, tripped, felt dizzy and fell, they aren't sure, and hit her head on pavement patio, and her husband found her dead. A girl I went to grade school with was crushed under a Smith machine at a local gym. 24-hour gym, so no one was around to help. An old buddy I had known since elementary school died while driving when a chunk of loose gravel was kicked up through his windshield by a passing truck on the freeway. His best friend had been riding in the passenger side and had to steer the car to safety. It was nobody's fault. Just a complete freak accident. I've always felt terrible for the friend who had to watch it happen. I think about my friend who died a lot. He was a really cool guy. I still remember playing basketball with him during recess when we were kids. It's strange to think that he never could have known how his life would end or see it coming in any way. That kid I used to play basketball thought he still had an entire life ahead of him. Classmate killed by leopard. A girl in my orchestra class in 7th grade passed away with her siblings and dad. The dad was flying them in a private plane, I forget to where, and they crashed into a mountain. He was shortstop in a high school baseball game. Other team hits the ball. Ball hits my friend square in the chest. His heart stopped. They tried to do CPR. But he was gone before the ambulance got there. My student's dad is a fisherman. One of his workers was leaning over on their boat grabbing something when the boat made a sudden movement and he hit his head and died. A friend of mine was walking around a small town near the capital of my country, probably looking for lunch, when a semi passed by. The container it was pulling fell on its side and crushed her. The whole thing was even in the news. The whole story of what the hell was a semi-truck doing in the middle of a small town, in the middle of the day, was a consequence of my home country getting rid of trains and forcing all transported goods going anywhere be transported by trucks, forcing them to cut through the most unlikely places. There was this guy 3 to 4 years my junior in high school who I sometimes bumped into. Few years after graduating from high school I read the local newspaper and saw him there. Apparently, just like most teenagers, one night he had a heated discussion with his family and then stormed out whatever room he was in, slamming the door behind him. Well, the door was a door window and the glass broke and a shard of it stabbed him in the leg. He died from blood loss at home, before the ambulance even showed up. He must have been 17 years old at the time. A real tragedy. Had an uncle that lived down at the beach. Used to spend a lot of time out on a Bertram fishing boat. Many beers were usually enjoyed during those times. They used to go out into deeper water and jump off the flybridge, the roof part of the boat where there are controls as well as a place to sit. One day he went out with some friends and they decided to partake in said jumping. Unbeknownst to him, the tide had gone out and they had drifted into shallow water. He dove in headfirst, hit the bottom, killed him. She slipped in the shower and died instantly on her first week in boarding high school. She was a classmate and deskmate in primary school. I always have regrets that I did little to help or speak out as she was bullied in primary school or get a chance to apologize for the many times I looked the other way. I was in high school and working retail at a chain furniture store. Two of my coworkers were sisters. Their mother was in charge of the special ed program at my high school. Their mother had been diagnosed with brain cancer a couple of years ago. She was in remission. She came to work to pick up her two daughters and go to her follow-up appointment, make sure still no cancer. Not long after they left and got on the interstate, an 18-wheeler lost control after jumped the median and hit their car, killing everyone. Her husband was working and could not go to the appointment. He lost his wife and two daughters in a second. His whole family gone because an 18-wheeler lost control. A family friend bumped his head. Walked about 15 feet across his backyard. Sat at his picnic table and died. Autopsy showed no head trauma. But he broke his neck when he hit his head. They figured the walk across the yard caused something to shift enough to do fatal damage to his spinal cord. My best friend died in a helicopter malfunction wreck. The worst part? It was a training exercise. Equipment malfunctioned, killing him and another young man. Edit. Forgot there was also another case of this where I worked at the time. Didn't know either of the young men. But from unknown reasons, their helicopter plummeted, exploded, and killed them both. Way to go, US Army. In short, I won't be getting on a helicopter. Ever. Pretty rough set of downhill turns for trucks on a 2-lane road. Plenty of memorials. While my friend and her mother are going up the hill. A flat bed coming down the hill was loaded with rebar going into Angel Gear and was arriving to the same bend as my friend and her mother. The bands of the truck holding the rebar snapped from the force of the turn, sending an open spoil of half-inch rebar spearing through the driver's side of the front window, leaving the daughter untouched in the passenger. Death for the mother was not instantaneous. To add salt to the wound, she had just finished convincing her mom to take her to get a skateboard so she could hang with her skater friends, me and others. Gosh. Rip J. Former coworker of mine was gored by a bison while on a trail run. Ironically, he often posted on message boards for the park to be aware of wild animals while there. And in one post he said there are too many people with headphones on. Or trying to get too close to the bison to take selfies. He was normally very careful apparently. My best friend was struck by a car when we were 16. His brain was so badly damaged he was in a vegetative state for a couple years before passing. Whole thing fucked me up pretty bad. A friend of my dad's was overseeing a repaired braided 3/4 cable being spooled from one drum to another, at very high speed and tension. He had his gloved hand loosely on the wire guiding it into position, a big no-no in the industry. A frayed wire came through. Snagged his glove and dragged him into the drum, wrapping him into a contorted paste within seconds. A family member highly allergic to bees is swarmed by them and jumps into the water to escape them. Turns out it was an immediate 30+ foot drop as the pond was an old quarry. They couldn't swim and drowned. Kid I was friends with in middle school was riding his bike without a helmet. Hit a rock and went head over handlebars right at a T intersection. As he was getting up, an old lady driving on the cross street somehow dropped her glasses and bent over to pick them up. Didn't see him. The coroner said that Nick would have survived either crash on its own. But the combination of the two killed him. He used to sneak into class early before school and draw a little flower pot with a cartoon daisy in it, and then he'd write the words, "Hello flower," under it. He must have done that 100 times. The day after he died, the teacher let the whole class draw "Hello flower" on the chalkboard. A guy in my high school climbed a high-tension power line on a dare. He was electrocuted. His heart stopped. And he fell from the top all the way to the ground. Kid I was tangentially friends with in high school decided to run away from home. He was upset that he didn't have enough money to get a bus ticket to where he wanted to go and threw down his duffel bag in disgust. The handgun he had in it went off and it shot him in the stomach. His parents hosted a week-long camping and binge drinking wake for all of us after the funeral. I developed a taste for Jägermeister during that time. And #X200B. Note for some of the comments I see. This was pre-Columbine in Arizona and this guy would regularly show up to school with different knives and/or guns. Please don't assume that he had any inkling of proper gun handling. Much less the give a fuck to follow it if he did know it. Imagine if Butthead was an actual real person. Now give them about 2 more IQ points. And the amazing ability to get super hot girlfriends. And then you'll have a better image of who this kid actually was. Yes. It was a regular thing for high school kids to get trashed. It was illegal. But not nearly as enforced or frowned upon in the early 90s as it is now. When I was younger and drove 125 CCM bikes. I was in a bike group, consciously not calling it a gang cause it wasn't like that. We just rode for fun together. Ate and did some tricks, filmed us, and that was it. Closing parenthesis. One fateful day we rode together as we always did. On a beautiful mountain road with great weather late in July. The road we were on, which we all knew and rode regularly, had beautiful curves for biking. One of our older members, let's say maybe 18-19s, somehow lost control of his bike in one of those curves. His bike crashed into the barrier but he slid into the little vertical metal pole that holds up the barrier. He had full gear on. Boots, gloves, complete leather suit with protectors in it and his helmet. Unfortunately the pole connected right under his helmet. Before his suit began, took his head clean off. Still inside the helmet. I was maybe 2 bikes behind him almost at the end of the convoy so I saw it unfold. It was maybe 1.5 seconds in real time but I swear time stood still for a good minute or so. Still in shock I called the cops. One of our members that was closer to him called his father. When his dad came, he had to look at his dead son in all this protective gear and pull out his helmet with his head inside from the escarpment behind the barrier. While sitting there contemplating if I would ever ride again, I made one of the biggest mistakes in my life and got a glimpse of his face while it was carried out of the debris. The look of sheer terror frozen in time. I'll never forget it. As he was one of the best riders in this group we looked everywhere for anything that might have caused the loss of control. Leaves, dirt, water, oil. Anything on the road. We didn't find anything. The sun was shining. His bike was always clean and finely tuned and according to the cops there weren't even any recent crashes on this part of the road for a potential oil spill or leftover debris or SMTH. To this day I never got the closure as to why it happened, what may have caused it, but his life ended right then and there. For him the how doesn't matter anyway. Somewhat selfish even. To look for an answer. As it does nothing about what happened, but I guess humans always want to know the how, why. For everyone that got this far, I'm sorry you had to witness this horror story secondhand now. Ride safe always and have a beautiful day. Less than 3. Friend from high school was driving a pickup with his friend and girlfriend in the car. Front spring snapped causing them to roll over into oncoming traffic. The driver and passenger both died. The person in the middle, bench seat, was unharmed. After reading all of that I can say it's scary that you can lose your life potentially any moment and that might be not your fault at all. Literally makes me want to stay home 24/7. My cousin was killed by Chrysler. There was a defect in the hatch of Chrysler minivans, where if they were hit from the inside, they would open unexpectedly. My aunt was moving the car out of the driveway so the other kids could play hockey or whatever. Just backing the car into the street. She put my cousin in the back so he wouldn't run behind the car as she pulled out. They lived on a little cul-de-sac. No danger of other vehicles. One of the kids called her name. So she hit the brakes. My cousin lost his balance. And hit the inside of the hatch. Which opened. He fell out and hit his head. And was taken off life support 3 days later. It later came out that this issue was raised by an engineer. And when he wouldn't drop it, Chrysler fired him rather than fixing it. From a very young age I have understood that corporations don't give a fuck about anything but money. Every pride flag, every "we stand with X community," every donation to a charity, all calculated efforts to maximize revenue. Nothing more. Don't ever kneel at the corporate altar. They can all burn. For all I care. Electric accident. They were supposed to be careful but burn into charcoal. A reminder to all that electricity is very dangerous. Friend's brother accidentally got caught in the back of his dumpster truck and was crushed in the trash compactor. This sadly happened only a couple years after their mom was hit by a car and killed. My childhood friend, F24, died last summer in a car accident when her boyfriend drove too fast and didn't check the environment. Run over by a truck. 1 week before their marriage. Edit. Typos. Whole family died of CO poisoning in an RV. If I remember correctly, it was from a cooking appliance. Quite tragic, sad face. One of my dad's good friends was driving a four-wheeler and it rolled over on top of him. He was wearing a helmet. But the handlebars of the ATV pushed through the visor on his helmet, crushing his skull. Friend of my brother's was buried in an avalanche while snowboarding in the late 90s. When I was little, maybe 10 or 12, the neighbor was up on his roof doing some work and fell off the high side. My mom and stepdad ran over to help. But I could tell it was bad when they just took his pulse and stepped back to wait for the ambulance. He never woke up and died a few months later. I used to work for a septic company. A guy who drove one of the big septic trucks that sucked out underground septic tanks at people's houses had to get on his hands and knees and reach into the tank because the lid had fallen in. He lost his balance and fell head first in. His shoulders got wedged in the opening and he drowned upside down in human waste. I don't think I've ever heard of a worse way to go. The homeowner found him after about an hour. My good friend's sister was on a beach with friends. When whatever way or area they were walking in caused a sand dune to collapse. The poor girl unfortunately was only stood in the exact wrong place at the wrong time, since all her friends were able to pull themselves out. But they didn't get her out in time. Nearly 3 decades ago, my best friend, family friend's sister was arguing with her boyfriend on a sheet of ice over a big river. She stepped on the wrong spot, broke the ice, and fell into the water's current, which took her along with it. A friend of mine almost died trying to catch a togepi in Pokemon Go. Walked out into traffic. Another friend's dad was killed when an 18-wheeler kicked up a piece of road debris and launched it into his head. Ironically, Dad was picking up trash and debris on the side of the road. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to drop a like. If you would like to see more content like this in the future, subscribe and turn on notifications to be notified about future videos. Now check out one of these interesting videos.